So what I thought would be helpful is to use this as an audit to try and share some ideas sorry, notification about the recording put me off. To share the ideas and the practices that we have, and just to have a kind of a sort of a good look round at what we do. And then the second part of the workshop in October is more about the nitty-gritty of how we safeguard. But it was very difficult not to do it unless it was separate. It just made sense. So there will be opportunities for questions throughout the presentation. I'm going to stop after each section just as a catch-up. Otherwise, I'm going to be talking at you, which is just going to be hideous. So with that, let's start. Bear with me while I set it all up. Sorry, I think you've got everything in there, even my notes. Why is this not doing what I want it to do? What am I not doing, Karen? This is working perfectly when we chatted. Oh, there we are. That's better. I have to say I do like that picture. I might have to print it out and put it on my wall. So I thought I'd start off with the aims and the objectives of the workshop, which I sort of said, sorry, I'd sort of mentioned at the beginning. So this is about sharing ideas around good risk assessment practice in relation to safeguarding, which will be the second part. So a sort of an audit and an opportunity to share our collective ideas and tips. So the workshop will be in two parts. The first one is today, obviously, and the second one is on October the 9th. The contents of both are going to be based on the ACTO competencies, predominantly section 7. Now, I know that there are safeguarding and risk mentioned throughout the ACTO competencies, but for clarity, I've just stuck to section 7, which I'm sure everybody knows off by heart. So this one is the risk assessment part, which is we're going to look at how risk can be assessed, when we need to assess risk, indicators, particularly when we can't see the person and sometimes when we can't hear them either, how we manage risk. There will be some resources. Now, I was hoping that I'd be able to upload them into chat today, but this morning I thought, oh, I'll check the links and some of them aren't working. So they will be available to download from the ACTO website, but if you would like them before they're uploaded, at the end of the presentation, there's my email address and Karen's email address. If you just email and request them and I'll get them out to you. And then there'll be points to consider and prompts throughout, as I said, and a Q&A at the end if we've got time. I thought it would be really helpful to define risk. And again, I think this is kind of part of safeguarding, is that often we assume that we know what we mean. So for clarity, I'm going to go right back to basics. So for me, the definition of risk in this workshop is anybody, regardless of age, who is at risk of harm by another or to themselves or of harming someone else. It includes, as we all know from levels 1 and 2, emotional, sexual, physical, and financial abuse. And then there are specific risks, which I think sometimes can get lost in the mix. Things like forced marriage, female genital mutilation, human trafficking and slavery, radicalization and terrorism. So we're looking at how we assess the risk for the individual clients that we meet with. And throughout all of this, we need to obviously remember that confidentiality and its limits, they need to be explicit to clients. And that needs to be made clear before we even meet with them. And we need to hold that in mind when we're risk assessing and deciding on any appropriate action. I know this sounds obvious, but I think it would be really foolish not to mention it. So the ACTO competences for online therapy, we're going to be looking at the ones that are underlined today. So demonstrating knowledge of risk indicators when visual cues are not present, making effective use of risk assessment measures when practicing online therapy, and be able to continually assess risk throughout. And finally, developing internal and external strategies for managing risk to self. Now, they won't be in that order. I'm going to deliver them in the order that seemed to make sense. And obviously, the caveat to that is that you are professionally accountable to your individual governing bodies. So whether that's UKCP, BACP, NCPS, BPS, and others. So the guidelines obviously are to outline the training requirements for ACTO membership, but the other guidelines within your professional organisations need to be integrated into your practice as well. So we're going to look at risk assessment as section 1. And as ACTO says, we need to be able to make effective use of risk assessment measures when practicing online therapy and be able to continually assess risk throughout. I'm assuming, from the workshop, but I'm making the assumption that probably like me, everybody gets into the groove and we do our work and then we forget things that might be obvious. It's a bit like when you start driving. I don't know how many of you actually mirror, signal and maneuver. I certainly don't. And it's the same thing, that the continual risk assessment is something that we need to be doing. And I think most of us do it without thinking. But again, this is an opportunity to just check out, how is it that we do that? How do we know that we're continually assessing risk? So the risk, I'm coming from the assumption that risk is ongoing and starts from the point of your first introduction to the client or contact. That includes third party, which I'll explain a bit later on. So this is like, where is the referral from? Is it off the website? Is it within a working context? What is the setting in which you work? So do clients contact an admin portal first? Do they contact you direct? And how is the therapy going to be delivered? So is it going to be instant messaging? Is it going to be video? Is it going to be face-to-face? And your setting and your clients. So if you're working in an organization, what are your target clients? What are the associated risks that may be for those particular client group? And looking at how you and your organization continue to assess risk throughout the work. So I developed a little tool, which I want to share with you. It's called a Rule of Risk Assessment Guide, which if you use an acronym is ROTRAG. So I might have to think about that again. But it's very, very simple. I'm visual, so I find that if I've got something I can look at, I'm more likely to remember it. So what I've done here is I've broken it down into private practice, that's column 2, and employed within organisations, column 3, because there'll be a different level of risk associated to where you're working. The method of delivery carries different associated levels of risk. So what I've put there is an in-person client that you're meeting with face-to-face who isn't anonymous is going to be the least risk. The highest risk I've put is a private practice person working by email with somebody outside of the UK. I've also done a little asterisk there because I've suggested that we add 1 for clients if they're anonymous, or clients if they're outside of the UK or our country of residence. And because of the associated risk, I don't suggest anybody takes anonymous clients. It's just too risky. If you notice, what I've done is I've ragged it. So because most people use the traffic light system for risk, so red, orange and green, or red, amber and green, depending on how you want to say it. And I've divided them into lower, medium and highest risk. And again, this is a bit of an audit. I tend not to talk about low risk or high risk. I think we can only say it's lower or higher. There are no guarantees. And obviously, somebody presenting as a lower risk might very rapidly become a higher risk. So it's just to keep that in mind. This may seem fairly obvious, but it's just a reminder of what it is that we do when we meet a client. So we're now going to look at the information that we ask for. So the first part of the risk assessment is the intake form. We all use our intake forms. We send them out. We get given to them by our place of work. But it's good to just go back and just check them again. So what do you or your organisation ask and why? So what is the rationale behind what you're asking? what are your basics needed in terms of information from the client to effectively risk assess within your work context? So, for instance, I work in private practice, and for me, my basics are contact details. I just started to introduce an in case of emergency contact and GP referrals, because they're the basics that I need in order to safeguard somebody when I meet them. I send out the intake form before I actually meet with the client, and I won't meet with the client until that is returned. So what do you do? What does your place of work do? And how is the information you ask for helpful? And what else do you need to know? So again, throughout my form, there are other things that I need to know. Living situation is really important. So excuse me, I've got a dry throat. Any pre-existing or possible mental health or neurodivergent issues, any psychiatric history, any medication they're on, just so that we can be aware and build a fuller picture. The most well-known evaluation tools, in my view, are GAD, PHQ, and CORE. CORE 10 is the sort of shortened version. Then there's CORE CYP if you're working with children and young people. And then what I call CORE Huge, which is the one that's all the questions. They're often used in organisations. They're really useful. My word of caution would be don't use them as a Cosmo quiz. I'm sure you don't, but some places of work I've come across literally will not let somebody in if they've got a certain score. And it's nuanced. It's what's behind what people are asking. Now, Mick Cooper has done a really interesting article about the use of evaluation tools. That's on my resources. And he talks about how they can be useful, how they can be prohibitive. And one of the things that I've banged on about forever, I think, is that people are used to using these forms. So if you've got somebody who feels that they've been excluded from a service because their score isn't high enough, or if you've had people who've been refused because they felt their score has been too high, it may be that they engineer the form to get what they want. Now, that doesn't mean they're lying. It just means that they're looking to get something that they need. The language within the forms, if you're talking about depression, if you're talking about suicidal, OCD, check that out with the client, because the words are kind of banded around and they may be different to what our understanding is. The other thing that Mick Cooper says, which I also agree with, is you don't necessarily have to go through the form. You can weave it into the narrative of the session so it feels less interrogative, which I would subscribe to. As ACTO members, you have access to TACLIT. TACLIT has a library of different evaluation tools. So if you haven't already had a look, I'd definitely go and have a look. Orca, no, I like Orca because they're industry tested apps. So if you've got a client who's using an app, and especially if that's had an evaluation tool, you can check out on Orca how reliable it is. So they're kind of, I guess a better term would be recommended apps. It's really useful. Evaluation tools can also be custom built for your place of employment or workplace. So just check out what they're asking and how comfortable you feel with that. Now, Mick Cooper says the opposite, but what I suggest is develop your own. If you're not looking for quantitative or qualitative data, and you're just looking to track the client, you can use the bits that make sense to you, as long as it can be rationalized. So my rule of thumb, which is a horrible rule of thumb really, is if you were having to stand up in court, would you feel happy with the decisions that you'd made? So that's, again, that's part of the evaluation tool. Do they make sense? What's the rationale? And the word of caution, again, is about not using it like a Cosmo quiz. You know, the old quizzes where mostly A's, you're a gregarious person who wears purple and likes sprouts. It doesn't work like that. I'm sure we don't use it like that. But in some settings, it does seem to be used without much thought. So we're going to go on to the points to consider. I'm going to come off screen sharing so that we can see each other. So these are all the bits that we've talked about. So I just wanted to go on to some Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing and come back to you guys. Karen, are you? Is there anything?
Sorry,
Right, there's
I was
some
answering
things
a question.
sorry, yeah, there's some things in chat. So
Alison Moore asked, where would you signpost anonymous clients?
it depends on the age group. There are organisations that work anonymously with clients. Would that be useful to include in the resources?
Yeah.
Shall I? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I talk to you just for a second? The group I'm thinking about are actually pilots. That's a group that I work with. And because of the nature of the regulation in their environment, so if they present with possible mental ill health, which usually it isn't, it's a perfectly normal reaction to a life event like bereavement, they will be suspended from flying. And so a lot of these people approach me anonymously, and I would really welcome your experiences. Thank you, Pippa.
I wanted to clarify that anonymous without any contact details is a no-no. For private practice. Anonymous, if you've got some kind of way of getting hold of them and verifying where they are, then that's less risky. So I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to, if you want to take my email address, to get in contact and chat this through with you. Not that I'm an expert, but it would be good to get a conversation going. And I'll add the organisations that work anonymously. Again, that risk assessment was based on my experience of working text-based, where they were anonymous clients and we couldn't even get hold of that. We didn't have access to that IP address. So that was, in terms of safeguarding, that was interesting, but not impossible. What other questions have we gotten here? Yep, we've done that one. How would I ensure secure delivery of these forms? Oh, that I cover that, but the way that I do it is that I ask people to password protect. So to send me a document saved and password protected. And the password that I normally ask them to use is their date of birth in a 6-figure thingy. So for instance, 10th of the 4th, 24. If that's their date of birth, and then the last 3 digits of their postcode, because I will have that and they will have that. So obviously I get that verbally, and then that becomes their password whenever they're sending things to me. And I use Proton Mail at the moment because that's the one that I'm told is the most securely encrypted. So yeah, just an easy password would be my. Does that answer that question? Sorry, I'm just going through the.
There's one from Andrew Kuhn about
Yes, I know.
The different legal and moral obligations of a therapist.
That is going to be covered more in workshop 2. It's quite a big area. Yeah. Okay. Yes, you will get a copy of the resources. If you want one before it goes up on the website, then email me. My email address will be at the end of the slide, or email Karen. Her email address will be on the last slide as well. Oh, hello, you've already answered that. Sorry, Karen.
All right, we're double doing it.
We are double doing it. Better than not.
And Wendy Taylor's got a question.
Wendy, where's Wendy?
Yeah, I was just wanting to highlight the need to have next of kin or a nominated person for the client, because I did an ACC course not long ago, which was all about this new approach, because of what the coroners had said to the industry, that we needed somebody who we could inform if the person was having increased risk, so that families could support them. I just wondered whether that's why you're changing that element for yourself.
Yeah, that's why I put the ICE in case of emergency contact in. I mean, there's a whole a whole lot of stuff really that needs to be considered about, you know, is the client happy for that person to be contacted, when they'll be contacted? That all comes within the confidentiality. But I certainly think it's essential. And also working remotely, if I've had clients, I ask them if they have any health conditions I need to be aware of. So for instance, does somebody use an EpiPen? Do they have Ventolin? Where is it? Is it accessible if they need to use it in the session? And also so that I can then contact their ICE person as well as any emergency services. So
yeah, I think one of the things I found when I introduced it was talking to the clients and talking it through with them, and actually checking out, because sometimes it's not the next of kin that they
it's not
to ring. It would be somebody else who, so it is quite a problematic area to resolve.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm pretty sure I come on to it later on, but it's this particularly if you're working with somebody who's in a domestic violence situation, the person, their contact needs to be somebody really safe. And so, yeah, there's lots of different layers to this. And if you've got somebody who doesn't want their partner to know they're in counselling, or their mum or whoever. So anyway, thank you for that. Is everybody happy if I get on to the next bit? I'm just aware of time. Okay, I should go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so on to section 2. So Acto says that we need to demonstrate knowledge of risk indicators and visual cues are not present. Well, I could do a whole workshop on this. It's such an interesting area and such an important area. So the basic risk that we all know about, can the client be overheard? That's a confidentiality thing, but it's also about risk. So if you've got a client, for instance, who lives at home and is wanting to talk about something that's contentious in the family, they shouldn't be overheard, really. Is where they are confidential. And I smile as I say this, because I had somebody once who was on the bus and they kept losing signal, and I completely forgotten to remind them were they in somewhere safe and confidential. So it's something that's kind of, again, that sort of went in. Are they alone or being coached or coerced? So are they looking at the camera? Are they sort of looking around? And is that not looking at the camera to do with the fact there's somebody in the room? Or is it that they're just not looking in the camera? Noises, can you hear noises? Are they under the influence of any mood-altering substance? Well, I'll explain that more in the case example that I'm going to do. And are they who they say they are? And again, when I was working for the anonymous service, there was an account that was set up, and it became apparent that there was more than one person using the account, and the game was for somebody to come in and present a situation which meant that there would be a huge risk, and the safeguarding leads then would spend most of the evening trying to locate the client and get them safe. And we were given addresses that weren't correct. And we were told other information as well, which caused alarm. So how do you know who they say they are? I would suggest that as you build up the relationship, in addition to all the information that you have, you'll pick up clues. You'll get to know their lifestyle. You'll get to know what they do. So this particular example I wanted to give was, I was working with somebody, and I've been working with them for a while. And this again was text-based anonymous therapy. She had told me that part of her username was her real name. So just in conversation, I knew what her real name was. We got to know each other fairly well, and the system that we used, there was a little indicator you could see when they were writing. She was very quick to respond, so I would write something, and almost immediately that I pressed send, you could see her writing something else. And this particular day, she was taking longer than usual to respond. And so I just checked it out with her. I said, are you okay? You know, are you somewhere where, you know, you can be seen? And anyway, it transpired that she'd taken an overdose. And part 2 of that will be a workshop too. You can find out what happened. But I just thought it's a really good example of how we just kind of know our clients. So sometimes the it's not as simple as going, what are the non-visual cues? It'll be very much around our own intuition and how we relate to the client. So in the next slide, I just wanted very quickly to go over that again. So what are the non-visual cues in your particular setting? So it may not be, as I've just said, the stock ones that we have, that we know about. I also just wanted to ask, what is our individual attitude to checking out risk with clients? Because sometimes there's a discomfort about checking something out, particularly if somebody might be under the influence or if they are at risk. How much do we want to be, in inverted commas, kind to the client? And that's another one of those mirror signal maneuver things. I'm not sure we often think about where our comfort zone ends. Be clear about what you're asking your client and why. And with both of those, it's good to know, who would you check this out with? So have you got peers you can talk to? Have you got a supervisor you can talk to? So if there's any question mark around risk, who's your go-to? Particularly if you are working in private practice. Hopefully in a work setting, you'll know who that is. Karen, are there any other questions? Because that's a fairly short section. So if there isn't, I think we can probably just go on to the next bit.
No questions?
Okay, so we're going to look at, I'm just checking the time, the third section, which is how we manage risk to ourselves. And I think risk assessment, we always think of the client, same as safeguarding. In my view, we need to be risk assessing ourselves, our client, and the industry, because I think we've all heard some horror stories from time to time. So what ACTO says is that we need to develop internal and external strategies for managing risks to self. So again, this is a bit of an audit. So it's the pre-therapy information. What are you sending out to your clients? Don't forget your privacy policy and your contract before you engage in work. So I tend to send the contract after the half an hour initial session. Then I will send the contract and I won't engage with the client until the contract's signed. And that's about my accountability as well. So that tells them where complaints need to be made. Things like that it's 50 minutes. Again, it sounds obvious, but let people know how it's going to be delivered and also how clients can change that. So if they want to do a blended, then in the contract, it needs to be about the notice that you're given. For me, particularly, I can't suddenly just do a face-to-face because I rent a separate room. Safety, consider using a virtual address if you don't already. I've got one and it's great because it means that people can't randomly just turn up to my house. It also adds legitimacy if you are wanting to put an address in some of the directories, they ask for addresses or areas. And it just means that it keeps your own residents safe. I'm pausing because I'm also mindful that for some insurance companies, I work for insurance companies, and the deal is that they contact me and then it's exactly the same as it would be a private practice, except I invoice the insurance companies. And what one of them did was they sent out a statement to the client, they sent me a copy, and they put everything in there, including my full name. And Pippa is not my full name. And it had my middle name in there as well. And I was absolutely horrified. And right at the bottom of the contact information, because I put in my virtual address and I put in my home address and all this, there was a little box that said, please tick this if you don't want your personal details shared with clients. So just a word of warning, check the small print. If they put my date of birth in there, then they couldn't have put much more in there, really. VoIP numbers, they're going out of fashion, but they are quite handy if you want to have a phone number that's associated with the region that you live in, or a dedicated work number. There's a lot of discussion around this. Some people have two phones. I'm a bit old school. I allocate ringtones, like a separate ringtone for anybody who's a client and anybody who is not a client. And I tend to put their initials in as their contact details. I'm not quite sure what other people do or what the way around that is, I'd definitely be up for some ideas around how we can make that tighter. GDPR, yes, everybody's going to yawn. We are data processing. If we're taking an address and we're taking details, we're processing data. The link below is a really useful self-assessment tool. So you can go in there, tell them your situation. They will tell you what level you need to be at and what you need to pay. I'm registered with them. I pay, I think, 40 quid a year or something. But I'm also really old school, so I don't keep anything electronically. Once it's arrived, I've got a separate folder for when I have intake forms and contracts, and I print them off, and they're kept in a lock filing cabinet in the house. Client notes are kept in exercise books in a lockbox here in my shed where I work. And then I shred. There's my particular virus protector has a shredder in it, and I just shred their information electronically so that unless you were a forensic data person, you wouldn't be able to find it. And it just really helps with GDPR. It just uncomplicates everything. Organizational workplace setting. Check out what their policies are in terms of managing risk. And if you haven't got, if you're not in a workplace setting, write your own policy. So what would your policy for risk assessment be? Where would you go if you identified risk? Because obviously you don't have a designated safeguarding lead. So that would be things like your supervisor, peers, somewhere that you've got some kind of formal, semi-formal arrangement if you need to talk something through with somebody, and also if you need to refer. And again, with the resources, I've got a load of different contact numbers so that you can find out where to contact outside an area if you need to contact social services or police. Managing risk to ourselves. So again, it's fairly obvious. Are we working within our competence and skill set? Internet. Now, I read somewhere recently about somebody who had a pay-as-you-go subscription, and halfway through a session, their data ran out. Yeah, just don't do it. Look at the encryption and the stability and speed. Again, this seems fairly obvious, but sometimes it's not always, it's not consistent. I've got a spare little modem thing that I have. I think that's an extra 20 quid a month. And just in case there's an outage, it's chargeable, so it doesn't need electricity. I will use that. If the stability and speed from my home broadband isn't enough, I can use that. And out here, they got somebody who's come in and put a Wi-Fi booster in. Insurance, again, fairly obvious. Just check that your insurance covers you to work for people outside of the UK. Platform and method of delivery. I use Zoom because I've been told it's the safest. I like the fact you can lock the meeting room once people are in there, and it has a waiting room. And again, check out place of work or the platform that you subscribe to use. Just have a look and see how safe that is in terms of encryption and hackability, if that's even a word. Supervision and line manager. Is your supervisor up to date on safeguarding? And are they approachable? And the same for line management, because there is no place for shaming in safeguarding or risk assessment, and things do sometimes go wrong. So it's really important that you've got somebody that you can really trust if you feel like something hasn't gone terribly well. DBS checks, again, this is kind of sort of dotting the I's really. They're really hard to get hold of if you're in private practice, but there are what they call umbrella organisations that will do one for you. But my top tip would be, if you're in a place of work and you've had your enhanced DBS check done, sign up with the government renewal, because that would then, even if you don't work there anymore, your enhanced DBS check will carry on being renewed, and it's £13 a year. Level 1 and 2 safeguarding, again, that's fairly obvious. On the resources, I've got some free ones. The one that I tend to use, which was one that I was introduced to when I first started working online, is by Educare. I think it's £28, which I think is worth every penny, really. Keeping up to date with relevant legislation. So that would be things like the Mental Capacity Act, why can't I think of it because I'm talking off the top of my head, Deprivation of Liberty Act, all those kinds of acts that go in with safeguarding. I don't know whether you're aware, but if you go onto the government website, find the relevant legislation, at the bottom is a box and you can put in your email address, and every time that legislation changes, you will get an email, so you will always keep up to date. I'm currently doing it with the adoption, because they're going to change the way that we're allowed to work with adoptees. So it's things like that around safeguarding, or risk assessing your practice. It's just worth getting the updates. How do you password everything. I'll just password everything and change the passwords. Again, it's not safe, and I forget to do this sometimes, but just every so often change the password on your laptop or your phone. I've covered the client info by email. Any identified or increased risk in record keeping, I would imagine your place of work will have a place where you can record that so everybody's aware. Just do the same at home if you don't already. I'm not a prolific note taker, but the one thing I always do write is any increased risk and what I've chosen to do and my rationale, just in case. And again, things that we forget, good working practices. So build in breaks, pace ourselves. How many clients do we see a week? Client load. And it's really difficult if you're in private practice, because it's like buses, they come along in threes. It's feast or famine. So just be aware of how much you're taking on, what breaks you want to take between clients, and your client load. And have a look at your place of work to see whether what they're asking is reasonable. Because sometimes it can be a bit like kind of being on a conveyor belt, and you've got all the admin and stuff to do in between. De-stressing. How do you de-stress? How do you de-stress after sessions? Because sometimes if you've had a session that's been really difficult and you're kind of like this, again, it's stuff that we forget. How do we de-stress? What do we actually do? And there was something, and the other thing is our workspaces, are they ergonomic? There's another resource which is, can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, it's on my resource list, Access to Work, which you can get funding for things like desks and chairs. If you have any kind of disability or neurodivergence, then that can be funded even for private practice, and certainly your place of work should be providing you with chairs. Some do free eye tests, because again, that's important. And taking screen breaks. Make sure you get at least, well, I don't think it's enough, but at least 15 minutes between each client from a screen break. So those are the last 3 points to consider. There's the link for the Access to Work. That will be with the resources. And I guess the takeaway from this really is being proactive and not reactive. And again, it sounds really obvious, but as this is sort of like an audit, it's just a reminder, are we being proactive or reactive? And that's the end. Oh, apart from this, if you want to take down our emails, they are there. Karen and I are talking about an ACTA-approved safeguarding training, which would be the equivalent of doing sort of level 1 and 2 and above. If you are interested in that, let one of us know. It won't be just me delivering it, it'll be other people. But what we're hopeful that we can do is to do something so that there's a really thorough approach specifically aimed at online counselling, because there doesn't seem to be anything out there at the moment. And then part 2 is on Wednesday the 9th of October. And once again, thank you for bearing with me. And I'll take this off share and we can go to questions. Thank you.
Okay, first question. Rebecca asked, does the contract need to be signed by the client in order for it to be binding?
Not necessarily, because you've got an electronic email trail, but I ask people to sign it, even if they just type their name in. I just think it's good practice, simply because if it's sent back, then there's an acknowledgement that it's been received.
Suzanne Thompson asks, is there any information on how to make a virtual address?
Yeah, I can put that in. Okay, virtual address. If you bear with me, what I can do is I'll put that on the info, the organisations that do it, and I'll give you the address of the person that I use. If you type in virtual addresses, there should be quite a few that come up, and I'm racking my brain to try and think of the name of the people that I use, but I'll put that on the resources as well, if that's helpful.
Lovely. Louise asked about the electronic shredder, and somebody talked about councils.
Yeah, I've got one that's part of my virus protection, and I know Avast do one. So have a Google, and it basically, when you delete something, it asks if you want to electronically shred it, and you say yes. Again, I can put that on the resources as well. Make sure you've got access to that. It just makes it fragments it more, apparently, makes it harder to find.
Right. I was in the midst of writing a question, so I'll go to Jill Y first. Any sources of advice on encryption?
Sorry, laughing. No, because it's one of those things that I would hate to try and blag and say I know an awful lot about. My only advice would be to, whichever platform you use, do some research on what the industry says the encryption is like. That's all I can suggest. I'm not a technical bod by any means, so I'm sorry I can't answer that fully.
Okay, so I'm going to read Elva's question. Hi, Pippa. I'm interested in Alison's issue with risk for a pilot. If there is current or past risk, and we are working privately with a pilot, should we be considering breaking confidence and speaking to their employer?
Oh, that's a really good one. I'd love to open this up and get a discussion on this. I think that's a supervision question, certainly. It would depend on your own way of risk assessing and what that flags up, and it depends what the risk is. And I don't know what your contract with the employer is, if it's somebody who's come privately or if it's somebody that the company are paying for. That might make a difference. It's so layered. Again, I'm happy to have an email. If you want to email me, I'm happy to we can have an unpick of that if you want via a Zoom call. I'm happy to do that if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Pippa.
Because I need to know more about your situation and your supervision and all of that stuff, but I'm happy to chat it through with you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll definitely contact you. Thanks a million.
Brilliant. Okay, cool.
Okay, we have another question from Deb Clare. Can you use a virtual address for organisations such as ICO?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a registered address, basically. If you do it through a company, then you can use it as your registered address. So that's what I use for all my like my memberships and everything.
Any more questions?
Eerie silence.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Anybody got any further questions? Comments? Okay, so Wendy's asking, do most insurers allow you to work abroad with clients?
As far as I know, but check the small print. I'm with Towergate. They definitely do. Oh, that was something else I meant to say, because I didn't script this and I'm having to go off the top of my head. Working abroad, when we work virtually, sometimes our clients go on holiday and we don't know. So you definitely need to check your insurance. If you've got somebody who's popping off to Spain and still wants to have a session with you, then check you're insured to do that. It's just something that recently came to light. Again, it's all these things that until they happen, you don't realise. And that when they do work abroad, that also they're in a confidential space, not sitting on the beach with a cocktail. Because that just makes us jealous. It's just not fair.
Thank you. Somebody said something, Jill White, could you say more about the training you are developing?
Yeah, you'll have to stop me if I'm getting this wrong, Karen. What we're looking at trying to do is to fill the gap between what's out there currently and what is needed in terms of working online. There are loads of safeguarding trainings. There's one that I found that is for counsellors, but none that are specifically aimed for online counsellors. And although the level 1 and 2, that's standard, it's good to know, but how do we transfer that over to working online? So that's really what the course is going to be looking at. And it's going to go beyond level 1 and 2. So it'll be sort of for everybody. So supervisors, designated safeguarding leads, anybody who's involved in working virtually. It will cover risk assessment and it will cover safeguarding, including safeguarding if you are working with somebody who's out of the country or cross borders. So we'll be looking at the different legislation between the developed nations, because safeguarding in Scotland is not the same as safeguarding in England. And with the idea that then there'll be an update every 2 years, so that will keep your safeguarding training. It'll be a shorter training. The initial one, I'm looking at doing between 20 and 40 hours, depending on what seems feasible. So that could be over several Saturdays. It could be a couple of weekends. I just need to look at what people are prepared, what time people are prepared to give up, and the amount of information I need to get into. And it will also it will involve some elements of writing, because I'm aware a lot of the safeguarding training out there that's online is literally pre-recorded, tick a box, you get your certificate. So I kind of want to do something with a bit more oomph than that. Not that I'm passionate about it.
No, and Wendy Taylor followed up about the working abroad, thinking that USA have very specific rules.
Yeah.
Lucy responded they do, and certain insurers will cover you as long as your contract specifies and your contract operates under UK law.
Yes, that's the disclaimer that I put, which is that the work that I have is subject to UK law, even if you're not based in the UK. America, as far as I'm aware, you can't work in America unless you have an approved license, because the counselling qualifications out there are different. So you would need to look into that. But I won't work with anybody who's based in the US, because it's too tricky. When I looked to emigrating over there a few years ago, the law changes between each state, but mostly they ask you to have quite a high level of training. Most therapists over there are doctors before they become therapists, and counsellors, I think they insist on a master's. So it's yeah. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
No idea.
Thanks. From a CPD point of view, yes, there is a plan to send out a CPD certificate, as well as an evaluation form. So if you'd email me, we can give you the evaluation form, and then I can send you the CPD certificate. And the person that's done the blank CPD certificate is away till towards the end of the month. So it might take me a little bit of time before I can get your CPD certificate to you.
How rude of them to have a holiday.
Okay. Will has said the UK law disclaimer isn't applicable for those working from the EU, and it wasn't when the UK was in the EU, because the consumer gets to choose which country's court they take the claim to, either their home nation or the country of the provider.
It's a really sticky one. The BACP recommend putting disclaimer. I think, again, what, until it's tested out, and that's where the insurance is really important. There's a whole, again, when we do the proper training, we're gonna look into some case studies around that and ethical dilemmas. I think that my comment about being proactive rather than reactive is also about the industry as a whole. I think COVID hit, everybody put their cameras on and went, oh no, what do we do now? And that's part of the legacy. And it's a really important consideration. I don't know what your thoughts are, Karen.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because what we and how we interpret the law isn't necessarily how those that have specialised in working in law will interpret it. I don't particularly work with clients abroad, to be fair, but I do have supervisees who go to their home nations and their country of origin and work from there. So yeah, it's important you contract properly and that you have the proper insurance, and you're making sure that if you've got supervisees that are working abroad, that they have the proper safeguarding things in place too.
Which is why the guidelines from the individual professional bodies are useful, and I'll call them and ask them if in doubt, if you don't think the disclaimer's going to be okay, and check with the insurance company, what would they do if this happened? Again, we could do a whole workshop just on this. It's a real, minefield, I think is the word that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, because that's a really important consideration.
Yeah.
I think all we can do as professionals is to try and sort of, I can't even think of the word, make our practices robust and as thought through as we can, without scaring ourselves to death about not doing it, or being complacent.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as we come towards the end, I want to thank you, Pippa, for a thought-provoking webinar. And I personally really look forward to part 2 in October. And I want to thank you all for coming and giving up your an hour during a working day. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have nice days.
Okay.
2 more.
Claire and Kathy to leave. I'm going to...
Yeah, we can remove.
Okay. I'm going to remove you, Claire. Thank you for coming. Goodbye.
They might have just forgotten.
Oh, no.
Knackered.
That was really good.
Have you stopped the recording? Oh no, it's still recording. We don't want us in here.
Stop. Right. If yes, you'll see if yes when the cloud is.